Athens, the year 431 BC. Pericles takes the podium of the great democratic assembly and presents the Athenians with his most daring plan. War with Athens' oldest enemy, the city-state of Sparta. Sparta was the only other Greek city-state which still matched Athens in power. For the Spartans, trained from birth in the arts of war, were a fearsome military force, and they ruled all of southern Greece. Pericles was convinced it was time to finally vanquish this old rival. Victory over the Spartans would make Athens the undisputed leader of the Mediterranean. But for all the Athenians' enthusiasm, Pericles knew that this would not be an easy war to win. Athens' power lay in her navy. The Spartan infantry could well defeat her on land. And so he proposed a strategy of unusual complexity and sophistication. Pericles convinced the Athenians to abandon all the land around Athens and to retreat behind the great long walls that stretched down from the city to its harbor at Piraeus. Pericles would use the Athenian navy to supply the city by sea. And he would use this same navy to attack and harry the Spartans from the coast, slowly wearing the enemy down until they gave in. It was a strategy based on a set of finely judged assumptions. The Athenians crowded behind the city walls. Confident in their vision of imperial power and glory, they assumed that Pericles' strategy could only bring them victory. The Spartans invaded Athenian territory and set about burning all the farmland around the city. The Athenians became increasingly anxious. They could only watch from the city walls as their fields and crops were destroyed. 1 year into the war, the grain boats that fed the city brought with them an additional cargo: plague. A disease that would now devastate Athens. With the population crammed behind the city walls, the affliction spread like wildfire. Sufferers, racked with fever and overcome with unquenchable thirst, would crawl into the city cisterns and water mains to die. The plague would kill over a third of Athens' population. And then it struck the city's figurehead, Pericles. Pericles' death would have far-reaching consequences. It soon became clear that this one man had been the linchpin of the Athenian state. Without a single strong leader, countless figures now scrambled for the top position. And they were happy to do anything the people wanted, if it gave them power. With the assembly in the hands of self-interested despots, once mighty Athens began to lose her way. The war against Sparta degenerated into a bitter, dragging conflict that spread over a decade. The Spartans ravaged the land around Athens, and the Athenian fleet kept the city supplied. Neither side was able to defeat the other. Then, in the year 416 BC, a daring proposal was put before the assembly. A small Greek colony on the island of Sicily had asked for protection. Protection from a neighbor allied with Sparta. Why should the Athenians not come to their aid, humiliate their Spartan adversary, and perhaps conquer all of Sicily at the same time? The Athenians threw themselves into the project with fervor. Then, to great fanfare, the mighty invasion force set out for Sicily. 6 months later, word came back. The campaign was not going as quickly as hoped. They needed reinforcements. And then, nothing. No news at all. Then, in the autumn of 413 BC, a sailor arrived in the city. A man who needed a haircut. And as he talked to his barber, he told an appalling tale of a vast and terrible slaughter. It was the story of an invading army that had been pinned down where it landed, of how its leaders had argued with each other about strategy, of how their food and water had run out, of how they'd attempted to ford a great river in a desperate attempt to escape. This was how the Athenians discovered that they had been the victims of one of the greatest defeats in ancient history. Over 50,000 men had been killed or taken prisoner. 2 entire fleets of Athens' prized triremes had been destroyed. The Athenians, entranced by a vision of imperial glory, had in fact engaged in a pointless and vain campaign. With Athens' military power now crippled, her enemies began to close in. The Persians, whom the Athenians had humiliated 50 years before, now saw the ideal opportunity for revenge. They approached the Spartans with the offer of help. Where previously the Spartans had never been a naval nation, now they had a fleet, paid for with Persian gold. With Athens' navy decimated by the defeat in Sicily, the Spartans could now blockade the Athenian harbors. The great grain convoys from Egypt and the colonies could no longer get through. And finally, the Athenians began to starve in the streets. The people turned to their patron goddess, Athena. At the height of Athens' glory only 30 years before, Pericles had honored her with the most glorious temple ever seen. But the goddess could offer no help now. Athens, once so sure of her preeminence in the Greek world, was now home to a population ravaged by plague and war, besieged and starving. With her treasuries empty and her once proud fleet crippled. In 404 BC, Athens finally surrendered to the Spartan commander, Lysander. The Spartans' terms were heavy. The great walls which had defended the city were to be torn down. Her fleet was to be destroyed. What remained of Athens' mighty navy was put to the torch with only 12 ships allowed to remain. No longer would she rule the Mediterranean.